Today is Thursday, October 6, 2011, and we are talking to Bernice Hahn and her son Jerry and his wife June. And Jerry, Bernice, I know we have talked to you before. We've done an interview with you before, but now we are doing a video recording. The other one was an audio only. And we feel like you have so much information for us that it's well worth it to re-interview you, and we thank you for coming and sitting through it. And now we have June as well. So we'll start off by asking Bernice, could you tell us, Bernice, where you were born?
Well, right in Bridgeton.
You were born in Bridgeton.
You were born at the farm
Yeah.
at, Grandpa's house, and that was, I guess it, the addresses have changed over time, but Grandma's address was always 215 Forester, and ours was 216 next door, and of course now it's 3300 Forester is the farm now, but she was born, in the farmhouse.
Is that right?
In the farmhouse, right. She was born right there.
Would you mind telling us when you were born, your birthday? Maybe Jerry could help us.
August the 17th.
August the 17th, 1921.
Yeah, that's right.
You're your same age as my mother. My mother's name is Bernice, and she was born in that same year. That's right, that's right. And she has a sister, and you also have a sister, don't you? Or did have a sister?
Esther,
Right.
yeah.
And Esther
yeah,
passed.
I had one sister.
But she was younger. And of course Esther and they lived always up the street. And they were living there. Gus and Esther lived there when they both passed,
Well, let's dip back a little bit to Bernice's younger days. You were born in the house on Forester, which is the beginning of my subdivision, Spanish Village.
Right,
Was
exactly.
Spanish Village a subdivision when you were growing up?
Oh, no.
What?
We used to go sleigh riding on that, where Spanish Village is now. I can remember when we had the big snowstorm, and we had we used to start at the top of the hill, probably right where the water tank is, and go all the way down to where your house.
I live at the bottom of Spanish Village Drive.
And we have a long walk back, but.
And is that the same way that when Bernice lived there, do you think?
Well, I was born 21.
Yeah, but it all belonged to Robert Shears at the time, and of course Robert Shears owned a plumbing company, and he donated the site of the water tank actually it's behind my house at 12707. So he donated that property to the water company to bring the water up Forester Road, and then he was able to develop his property and sell it as subdivision ground, because he owned all that property in there.
What was on that property? Was it, were there apple orchards, or was it orchard, or was it?
No, he raised cattle, and at the bottom, close to where your house is, where the park is down there, they had a barn and raised cattle. And actually, my dad worked down there during the winter when he was didn't have anything else to do. He worked for Shears, and Junction School. They used to have sales down there, and Junction School would provide the refreshments as a way to make money for the for the school, for the Junction School.
And Junction School was the one up here on the Rock Road, just
On the Rock
little
Road where
one-room
Ponderosa
schoolhouse.
is now, so.
That was a one-room
A
outfit.
one-room school, correct. And
Jerry, I think a couple of people have told us that the area where you're talking about at the bottom of Spanish Village,
right.
that was very close to the main channel of the Missouri River at that point.
No, I don't think so.
Was that a backwater?
It was way back.
Was still
way
further back?
Yeah, they used to have the barn and all back there,
Uh-huh.
and they used to have big sales. I can barely recall it going to some of the sales, and they used to have a house down there. Well, it was originally a chicken house, and Ehlers used to live in the chicken house, and they used to work for Bob Shears, and he has a brother that lives up near Josephville, and when we go to dinners up there, I run into his brothers. One of the Ehlers used to work down there, and there's Ampmans used to work for Bob Shears. Do the work with the cattle and on the farm type stuff.
Well, when Bernice was growing up, where did you go to school, Bernice?
Penn Junction,
Junction.
yeah.
It was still the Junction School.
Yeah.
And your sister as well?
Yeah, sure, Charlene went.
Yeah, we have a picture at
No,
home.
not Charlene.
I don't know if I've ever brought that in. There was a picture of I think it was 19. Mother was about 14 years old. Did we bring that in?
It was a birthday party, and Elvira was in the picture also. A bunch
No,
of
there was a
cute
picture
girls.
of Pruitt and Mother and Delmar Hollenberg when they were about 14.
No, I don't remember seeing that picture.
But we have it at home. I guess I should bring it, maybe
Yeah.
blow it up or
Be happy
take
to
a copy
get
of it. Because I look at that picture and I think, my mother was 14.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, she was.
At the time. you know.
Right. Well, did you finish school? Because I know young women of your age didn't always finish school.
Oh, yeah.
Very
Yeah,
good.
you went up to the 8th grade.
Yeah.
8th grade, and then that was
I
it.
know, I
Right.
never missed a day.
Well, good for you. Well, tell me, what about the man you married? I believe your father's name is Walter.
Walter.
How did you meet him? Was he around in this area too?
How did I meet him?
You always told me that you started going with Gus, and Daddy went with Esther because Esther was the same age as my dad, and then Gus was older.
Well, now let's define who was Gus.
Gus, that's August Hahn, that's my dad's brother, and Esther was my mother's sister. And so what I was always told that Esther and Bernice dated, and my dad and Esther went together, and my Uncle Gus always had a temper, and they got into, and of course my mother could argue too, but they got into an argument,
Uh-oh.
and everything switched around. Then my dad went with my mom, and Gus went with Esther, and so that's the way they ended up. But my mother and dad, they got married in October 1941, I think, because
So you were 20 years old when you got married then?
Yeah, I
And
think
then-
that's right.
yeah, my dad was, his birthday was in May, so they were both 20 at the time. So that was pretty young for that era, that time. But there's times were very, war, World War I, World War II, and
And that was just a couple of months before Pearl Harbor then, right?
41, yeah, that was, and so, you know, that was kind of, maybe that was the reason everything was hurried up at the time.
I think a lot of people hurried up and got married when the war was looming on the horizon.
I think you're right.
So we have two sisters, Bernice here, and your sister Esther, that married two brothers.
Correct.
Your husband was Walter, and then his brother August married your sister Esther. Is that
Yes.
correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And where did you live when you got married then? In the same place?
They had a house down at, on the Rock Road down in, which now is Ur City, at the end of the Ur City Expressway. There was a small little house, and I think his dad built that house for him. I'm not exactly sure. And at some point in time, they moved, you know, up to the little house.
Was that because there was flooding down there that kind of got aggravating to deal with? Do you think that's why they moved?
I think that was part of it.
Because we've heard from another person that the flooding was a big problem.
I don't remember what year my grandfather passed, but I was probably 4 or 5 when we went to visit them, and they were living in the house down at the farm, in the 2 little white houses that were down at on St. Charles Rock Road at the end of Ur City Expressway.
And what was Bernice's middle name?
Anna.
Yeah.
No,
Anna.
I
Anna.
meant her maiden name, I'm sorry.
Maiden name was Pilgrim.
Pilgrim.
So it was Fred and Ida Pilgrim was her mom and dad. So, and Ida, she was a Gronewald, Gronewald. She was a Gronewald.
Now, when you and Walter got married,
Yeah.
then how many children did you have?
Born a girl, didn't I?
Yep. I was the oldest, and I was born in 44, and Charlene was born in 1948. So,
And Jerry, where were you born then?
St. Charles at the St. Joseph's Hospital.
Okay.
So I've had a thing where the doctor bill, how much it cost, and I think she spent 10 days in the hospital, and I think my bill was, what, $30. And I looked at that, and I think about my kids. I think Jimmy was 1,000, or Jeff was 1,000, and by the time Jim was born 4 years later, I think the bill was something like, the doctor bill was something like $1,500. So things had really gone up. I couldn't believe, 10 days in the hospital, and the cost was like $30. So
Well, and that probably was considered a lot at that time.
maybe so.
Now, let's ask your wife, June. June, where were you born?
I was born at St. Luke's Hospital in the city of St. Louis. But when my parents were first married, they lived in the city where my dad grew up, North St. Louis.
Where was St. Luke's back then?
It was in the city. I don't remember exactly where.
Yeah. I know they moved out into Chesterfield later on.
That wasn't there. It was
Uh-huh.
in the city.
And where did you grow up?
The first year I lived in North St. Louis, and then my parents built a house on Page Avenue in Overland, and it was close to my mother's parents, and I lived there till I was 8, and then we moved to a house off of Midland in Overland and near Marion School, and spent the rest of the time there.
So did you go to Rittner School then?
Yes,
And did you graduate from Rittner?
right.
Well, then if you were at Rittner and Jerry was here at Pattonville, and Jerry, you did graduated from Pattonville, correct?
1961.
How did you two meet?
No, we didn't meet in high school. We met much later, when we were all both close to 30. I was in a Baptist singles group, although I was Presbyterian, and Jerry was in a Lutheran singles group. And the two of them had joint activities
Oh,
on occasion. And so he was the newsletter writer for the Lutheran group, and he wanted to get my name and address to put in, send me a newsletter. And that's how he started calling me.
it was just a
Yeah.
excuse.
We had a joint activity. We had volleyball and bowling in St. Anne, and we met at, I guess,
Baskin Robbins.
huh?
Baskin Robbins. Was
No,
it?
but it wasn't Baskin Robbins then. It was at the, was it Shoney's? Or what is it?
What,
It was at the restaurant
It was
there.
something before it was Shoney's, wasn't it? I don't know. It was an ice cream parlor.
It's,
Not Dairy Queen?
No.
No.
Okay.
And,
it was
and-
Howard Johnson's. or
Howard
something.
Johnson.
Howard
Oh,
Johnson. It
well,
was at
that was
Howard
very
Johnson.
popular.
Yeah, and that was in 1975.
Was
so-
that on the Rock Road, I guess?
Yeah.
Where about on the Rock Road was that?
It's right through where the Blockbuster used to be, and
Oh, okay, so like across from the Airway Drive.
Yeah.
a little bit further. It's pretty close to the Burger King. It was kind of like across the street from the
Yeah.
Burger King, where the Burger King is now.
Well, long did you date before you got married? How long was your courtship?
Uh,
2.5 years.
Yeah, 75. I guess it was around August
oh yeah,
of 75, and then we got married in December of 77.
And then when you got married, where was your wedding?
At Overland Presbyterian Church,
Mm-hmm.
where I had gone all my life.
I was in St. Charles one night.
Yeah, you got married in St. Charles, didn't you?
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah, at Emmanuel.
and man,
Yeah.
We've talked to other people that went to Manufact Don Kuhlman that we've talked to. I believe his family was also there.
Well, half of the Lutherans here went to Emmanuel, the other half went to Our Redeemer, and then our other third, I guess, and then there was another faction that went to Zion Lutheran on Dorset.
Right.
So all the Lutherans, they all took a different path on Sunday, so I never did quite understand why a lot like Carl Banker and all, they got started with Our Redeemer and they lived right here, but they always went that direction. And the
I went to.
Bachhauses and those always went to, and your dad always went to Emmanuel. And so, and I think the Hahns that were the Pilgrims and the Hahns that lived at the top of the hill, they always went to Zion on Dorset. So, you know, we never did understand why they would go that.
But 270 wasn't the big barricade to
Right.
traffic that it is
No.
now. So the patterns were different altogether, weren't they?
So, so I don't know that, you know, everybody had ties to a certain church and.
Well, Jerry, I'd like to ask you, when you were growing up,
Mhm.
you were raised and lived on Forester, which,
Right.
as I said before, is
Yeah.
right before you get into Spanish Village. What neighbors did you have that maybe were around your age, such as the Banker family? We're here at the Banker farm right now.
Yeah.
Any of the Banker children your age, or did you know of them?
Well, we always had our little group, I guess. It was Charlene and I, and then it was Don and Bill, my cousins that lived up the street, and then it was Shirley and Jeanette Hahn. So between the six of us, it was pretty much
A group.
a group. And then Thomas Dubray lived down at the bottom of the hill. And so, you know, we would occasionally get with Thomas. And we used to always go to the Brannicky birthdays.
Now, what was that all about?
That's the Alma Brannicky at the Brannicky farm on Brannicky Lane. Every year they would have, in the fall, they'd have a big dinner and party.
And that was just on the other side of where Highway 70 is now. But
Exactly,
You could
that
just
was,
ride your horse across there back then.
That was south of Highway 70. And
Was there a road that went over there from?
well, there was a kind of a dirt road, put it that way.
Yeah.
And
There's a creek that goes there.
a creek at the bottom, and we'd always pass. Delmar Homburg used to live at the kind of at the bottom of the hill, and then we'd have to cross the creek and what have you, and then we'd come up the hill, and we there was always a road that we used to take to get to the Brannicky farm over there. But I can remember, like 1955, when we were, you know, when I was still in school and going to school over in Penn Junction, that that we'd even get off the bus and go right to the party.
Oh,
And they always had a big meal. In addition to everybody getting together over there in the garage, they'd always have a big meal. And of course, Gary Banker, he was, I think, we were the same age, but I think he was a grade lower than I was. And of course, Gary was over there, and Janet Banker, and Wilma Jean, and there was always a bunch of kids that we knew to, had somebody to visit with. So
when you were in, you graduated from Pattonville. When you were in high school, did you do any activities while you were in high school?
Not too many. I got out of high school when I was 16, and everybody else was 17, 18, 19, and so I was.
Explain how that happened.
Right, we'd like to know how that happened.
The way I understood it, that Junction School, the year that I was to start school in 1949, there was no first graders. And they thought that wouldn't look too good to not have a graduating class. And so that particular year, they decided to take 5-year-olds and put them in first grade so that they'd have a class.
To say they had a class.
And then Shirley Wiesingham was in the class, and I was in the class. And then by the 5th, there was more that lived in an apartment building at Natural Bridge and the Rock Road. It was there by the Westlake Park, and there's Donnie Gilmore. She lived in those apartments, and then there was Ronnie Gilmore. I'm not sure where those people came from, but we had Tommy Ottinger. By the time the 5th grade, we had 5 of us, and it was myself and Shirley and Tommy and Linda Gilmore, and there was Roger Kohler, I think. There was 5 of us when we were in the 5th grade.
So he had just turned 5 in August, and he started first grade in September. And he was always a year younger than everybody else. And that really affected the sports that he could have been involved with in high school, because he was younger, shorter, and didn't fit in as well socially. So
It does make a big difference.
Right, it really made a
Yes.
difference. So.
Yes, so I understand what you're saying, but what about, any other activities like scouts? Were you in scouts?
I did go to scouts. We had a group, the Nobles, trying to think, Chuck Noble and was their son, and I think it was Tom Noble, and I don't remember his wife's name, but there was a house on Old St. Charles, and we did do the scouts over there, and then there was another lady that had it off of Smiley Road, had scouts. So I did scouts for, I think it was Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, I'm not even sure which, for a couple years. But it was
Played
always,
ball too.
I did Little League for 2 or 3 years, but I was never very good at it, so
But you participated in it.
I participated. That's about what it
Now,
amounted to.
what was your dad doing? What kind of work did your dad
He did
do?
construction. He always did constructions. He worked with my Uncle Gus, and they farmed at some, probably I think it was in 1961 when my dad fell off of a scaffold, and or he was knocked off, and the scaffold fell on his ankle and just kind of cut his ankle in half.
Wow.
And they put it together in a cast, and he wore that cast on his ankle for about probably 6 or 8 months until it finally healed. But then because and of course my Uncle Gus, August Hahn, he had a disc operation, so we had my uncle who couldn't lift, and my dad that couldn't walk, and so then my cousin Bill and I, we were the walkers and lifters,
Oh.
and that's when they formed Hahn Brothers Construction, and that's when they built in 1961. Ed McNulty and Lonnie Cribben, they developed that property on McKelvey Road, and they built 122 houses over on McKelvey. There was 22 it's on the west side of 270, and then the rest of them were on the east side. But when I got out of high school in '61, that's what we worked on. Daddy had already built the first 8 or 10 of them, and then that summer I worked on the rest of them, doing carpenter work and whatever was necessary with my dad. But Bill worked on that too. He was my cousin, so it was Bill and I. So father's working with sons on the construction, and of course that's when I knew that's what I didn't want to do the rest of my life, because it was always hot, and anybody who works on construction, it's either hot or it's cold or it's raining, or it's never ideal weather to do construction. And so my dad asked me what I wanted to do, and of course I knew in my mind I didn't want to do construction, and my dad always said there was no money in farming. He didn't want me to be a farmer.
That's interesting.
And I told him, I said, well, I want to do something with business. And so I guess it was around August of '61, we went down to Sanford Brown, and he signed me up for Sanford Brown Business College. And so I was only there September, October, November, December, and they sent me and another fellow out for a job interview in trucking, and down at Service Lines downtown. And so I worked downtown with in the you call it billing and manifesting and all, and so.
Was that better for you?
Oh, I really liked it. And back in the '60s, air conditioning was not something that everybody had, and so I was on top of the world of being in any kind of a building that had air conditioning that.
In St. Louis.
In St. Louis, right, and you know how hot it gets. I mean, we take air conditioning now for granted, but back in the '60s, you just didn't have air
And
conditioning.
it's so humid here in St. Louis.
So humid, and so.
Right.
But anyway,
Now, was all this before you met June that you
Oh,
were?
yeah, that was.
How did you get back and forth? You lived out here in Bridgeton, right?
I lived
And
down here.
How'd you get all the way downtown?
Oh, my dad bought, we bought a used 61 Biscayne. We bought it at Jim Eager Chevrolet. It was one of their cut down versions without a radio or anything. And I think we got it for like $1,700 or something like that. And that was to get back and forth to Sanford Brown and Wellston. And then from Wellston, we just went the rest of the way to downtown. And so I drove back and forth downtown till 61, 62, and somewhere around May of 63, I asked for a raise, and they didn't need me anymore. And so that was my first lesson with, well, I don't know if you want to call it labor unions or what have you. But you know, it's devastating enough to be an adult and kind of know what's going on, but to be you know 18 and then ask for a raise and then they don't need you anymore. It's you know, it was a wake-up call to me, and so so I hit every truck line there was in the city. They used to have a truck line guide where they had all the truck lines on it. So I would just call them all up and go visit them. And finally I got my dad found an ad in the paper for Associated Shippers was looking for a biller. And I made one trip down there, and my dad said, well, you know, that Associated Shippers, they got another ad in the paper. So I made the second trip to Associated. And sure enough, I got hired down there doing basically the same thing I was doing at Service Lines. And Mr. Pat Brown was my boss, and he was my boss until I got drafted in June the 10th, 1966.
Well, tell us about that. You got drafted into the service.
Right.
Was that the Vietnam era?
Vietnam era, and spent my basic training down at Fort Leonard Wood
And so you were drafted into the Army?
into the Army as a combat engineer. And so I'm never sure how I got into the engineer group, but I remember on the test that they give you, they said, well, would you rather be reading a book or taking a walk? And I said, oh, I'll probably be taking a walk. And next thing I know, I'm a combat engineer, so
Maybe you should have been reading a book.
maybe I should have been reading a book. But I had my basic and AIT down at Fort Leonard Wood, and in October of '66, I landed in Frankfurt, and my unit was the 317th Engineer Battalion. It was in Eschborn, Germany, which is just out of Frankfurt, probably halfway between Frankfurt and Wiesbaden. But I had a real good tour over there. I was able to make Spec 5 in a year, and I had a car for a year, and I drove all over. I drove all the way to Ostend, Belgium, and then I drove to Eibsee down at in the Garmisch area.
So you spent your military time in Germany?
In Germany, and
Stayed out of Vietnam.
Isn't that
I was lucky
interesting?
to. Vietnam was going real strong at the time, and of course later on, you know, after I got home in like May 20th or something like that of '68, but the big Vietnam Tet Offensive didn't come until '69, and so you know, things got a lot worse over there. instead of getting better, they got worse. And so,
Now, did you serve any more than 2 years in the military?
no, I had to do 1 year at the Record Center. I did 2 weeks at the Record Center, and that was probably in 1969. I worked in the, at the Record Center, just doing filing and so forth. So
The place on page.
the 9,700 page, right?
Right, the big place.
Before all that paper burned up.
Before it all burned up, right? I was there.
When you came home from service, and you worked at the Record Center, but just briefly,
Right.
and then what did you do?
I stayed with Associated Shippers.
That was the firm you were working with before you got drafted?
Before I got drafted.
And you were able to get your job back with
I
them?
was able to get my
That's
ground
nice.
back. They had moved from 1402 North 17th Street to 1717 North Broadway. And so when I went back, it was in a different location, but most of the people were still there. And we worked there, I worked there until April the 1st of 1970, we went on strike. And then the company, in order to move freight, moved it over to East St. Louis. So we were on strike for right at 5 weeks. And then from April 1st to something like I forget the date, maybe the 8th or something like that, then they settled the strike. And then we all went back to work. And then eventually the company left the North Broadway address and they went to 650 North Front in East St. Louis. And we worked over there in East St. Louis from 1970 to 1975. So we were in East St. Louis for 5 years. And then they moved back to 1021 South 39th Street, 39th and Choteau.
No, you were at Hampton. You were on
The
Hampton.
terminal was down there, and then they moved the office to, let's see, which address it was.
That's all right. But you were in South St. Louis.
Yeah, it was in South St. Louis, and it was right next to the arena is where we had an office.
And you were still living with your parents in
Living with
Bridgeton
my
at this time?
Yes, I lived at home until Daddy had bought Will Banker's house at
The first house in
yeah,
Spanish.
12707 Spanish Village Drive. He had bought that probably in 75, something like that. And his renters had moved out, and I told my dad I thought I would rent his house at 12707. And so I moved in there probably wasn't it in September? September, I think,
77.
of 77. And after I got in that house, I said, holy cow, I need help.
Why is that? Why?
Well, I was going with June then, and I said, June, you gotta pick me out a washer, and you gotta pick me out a dryer, and you gotta pick me out a ice box. Yeah, ice box.
In other words, June, you need to come here and do everything.
I told her she could do my wash. She could wash, she could use my washer and dryer, but she had to throw mine in there.
He went with me one time to the laundromat and said he didn't like it.
One time, that did me in. And so I said, wow, I need help with this stuff. And maybe it was a good thing because I really did need a lot of help.
Now, June, what did you do when you graduated high school? Did you work?
I went to Southeast Missouri State and got a degree in teaching. And I came back and worked in Berkeley School District as a teacher,
What grade?
5th grade. And I taught for 2 years and decided that I wanted a master's degree in library science. So I quit and went to Columbia for another year and got a master's.
University of Missouri in
Mhm.
Columbia. I heard that's the only place you can get your library science degree?
That is the only place that's accredited by the American Library Association. And they got their accreditation the year that I went. The dean of the college told me that they were sure to get it that year.
How long does it take to get that degree in library science?
Now it probably takes a good 18 months. I was lucky. I had taken some classes as an undergraduate, and the dean knew the instructor I had at Southeast, and he waived 8 hours for me that I didn't have to take at Mizzou. And so I got it in 15 months. And then I went back to teaching in Berkeley, actually became a librarian there. And I was a librarian ever since. So,
And when did you get married then? What year was it?
77, December.
And you moved into the house with him in Spanish Village.
Right.
And this is the very first house on the right as you come up Forster, and Forster just automatically turns into Spanish Village.
It's right past the Spanish Village sign.
And Jerry, when did Spanish Village really start developing? Do you remember?
Well, Mother used to send me pictures when I was in Germany in 1967. They sent me pictures of Forster Road, because it used to be a little one-lane road. And of course, once Spanish Village came in, they had to widen it to make it 2 lanes. And I would get an update on, so that was in 67, I'd get pictures of the tank going up, and I'd get pictures of the street going in and the street going down and whatever. And so, not living in the subdivision, it was, it was just like, it was there, but we didn't take part in any of the activities as far as whatever went on. It was just there. But we did know that Will Banker lived in the first house, and Jim Salarano lived in the second house, and what's this?
What was the older man's name that lived in that 2-story house?
Oh, Sam Bashew.
Right, yes.
Sam Bashew lived in there, and Jim Hyder lived down the street. And of course, we knew Adeline and Carl and Otto Bachhaus, and I'm not sure when they passed, but we knew the Bachhauses, and of course we knew the Staffords that used to live across the street from Adeline, and we got to know Gary Mitchell, who lived at the end next to the highway. And
when did the Highway 70 come through there?
Highway 70,
What was in the middle 50s?
yeah, I was going to say,
You're
we
probably
used to
thinking of
walk it
270.
in 1958. And so, 50, and it was not completed then, so I would say, because we used to ride, while it was under construction, we would ride our bicycles all the way to St. Charles.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that was a nice little jaunt.
Yes.
And come back, and that was probably in 58 and 59. I'm not exactly sure when Highway 70 opened, but
My dad bought property in Hawk Point, I think in 65, and they used the new highway to get there then, so it was built in 65.
probably close to the 60 is when the interstate system opened up. But when I got drafted in 66, Highway 270 was not built yet, and it was built from Olive south. And when I was at Fort Leonard Wood, we'd have to go Lindbergh to Olive, and then we'd have to go over to hit the highway and hit Highway 270 at Olive, because that section was finished. And
That was probably called 244 back then.
I'm not sure what it was.
Before the northern section was built.
not sure what it was
I think
called.
you're right.
Because, you know, at the time, when when the interstate is being built, and, when you're older, it's just like it was always there.
Right, yes,
Yeah.
right,
But you gotta realize, at some point in time, Highway 70 was not always built.
right.
And I remember when we went down to Busch Stadium at the old Sportsman's Park, that when we rode with Hart Usry in the 50s, we'd go to a ball game and he says, "Oh, the highway's opened up," and he'd hop on the highway, and of course before you even learn how to drive, well, you get in the car and off you go, and then somebody else takes care of the driving part. Next thing you know, you're there.
Well, I live near the Halls Ferry Circle, just barely in the city, and our neighborhood had a number of unbuilt lots. And during that period, it was common to see houses moving from Walnut Park into
Oh,
our
yeah.
neighborhood. It was practically an everyday thing for
They don't do
years.
that much anymore now.
They were moving houses.
Out of the way of Highway 70
Oh, I see.
into vacant lots and
Into vacant lots.
further away.
Jerry, when you and June lived on Spanish Village, because you don't live there anymore, correct?
Correct.
How long did you live on
We
Spanish
were there
Village?
from 77 to 84.
And you had children?
Jeff was born there in 80, and Jim, we were still at Spanish Village. And then we moved in July of 84 to DePaul Hills. So my younger son Jim was born in September of 84. So we had already moved to the new house then. But I always had 12707 rented out, and
So you kept ownership of the house, even though you moved?
I just rented it. First, my first renter was Tony Stevens, and Tony lived there for 4 or 5 years, and then I had Everett Hines lived there 3 or 4 years, and in 2006 I had Crystal.
Chris lived there too. Chris lived there a long time.
Chris.
What was her last name?
Oh, Chris Campbell moved
Yeah.
there. She probably moved there in 90. I'm forgetting the years. Probably 88 to 90. Chris Campbell lived there for about 5 years.
Now, what about the house that you lived in across the street, your original house that you grew up in?
Farmhouse.
What happened to that house?
Well, Daddy's got always had some renters in there. We had the Ganales lived in there for 4 or 5 years.
It's still there and it's yellow now.
Yellow. And
Yellow side.
Michelle Light lives in there that works down at McDonald's, and she's lived there since I think 2006. She moved in the fall of 2006. 9, 10, 11. So she's lived there for about 5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I need to back up a minute and tell you something. His dad had truck farming on the hill, and he raised greens and sold them, had pumpkins and I don't know, several other things. But every year when he would till the soil on that hill, they found arrowheads.
Oh, really?
So, when they were excavating in Spanish Village, like behind the park,
Right.
I think, there's evidence that there were Indians up where we live too.
Wow. Wow.
Do you have any idea where the name Spanish Village came from?
No idea. I guess it's something, I think wasn't it Jerry Jones, the developer? It's
His idea.
his idea, and
I was wondering if it had something to do with the Yosti Spanish land grant that
Could have.
we're on.
All I know is it never fit in the spaces wherever you filled it out, and there were little boxes.
The little
you know.
boxes, yeah.
Street
You found that out too.
Now, did your boys go through Pattonville?
yes,
What grade school did they go to?
They went to Carrollton. They all.
Which is not there anymore,
Which is not
unfortunately.
And then they went to Pattonville, and Jeffrey graduated in '99, and Jim graduated in 2003. And Jeff, he tried Southeast, but it didn't do well there, and then he went to Rankin Tech, and that's when he's a mechanic now at Jerry Ackerman Toyota. And Jim went to SIU Edwardsville, and he graduated with a teaching degree in music December of 2007. And he started out doing subbing at Pattonville, and he did what was the school in St. Charles, June? Dubray Middle School. And he had several, and then his actually first teaching job was at Remington Middle School, traditional school. He did.
But it wasn't full-time.
It wasn't full-time, it was 2 hours a day for 1 year. And he wanted a full-time job, and so last year was his first year at Melville, in the Melville School District. And so he has 2 middle schools, Berkeley and Washington. And so then he renewed his contract this year for the second year. So this will be his second year teaching in Melville.
Now, where does your son get his musical talent from? Jerry, were you a musically talented person,
No, I was
June?
not. But he had a lot of music in the family. My uncle, Mom, didn't you say Uncle Ed Grunewald could play music? My Aunt Esther could play music.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, she played by ear.
She played by ear. And then, did you have some people that were musically inclined, June?
Well, I played piano.
You
my
played
sister and
piano,
I, so.
but Jimmy always
And
had a
sang.
talent for music, and so he's currently.
But that's not the only thing he did.
What do you mean?
Oh, he was on the swim team, he was on the tennis team, he was on track in
Wow.
high
Cross
school
country.
and in the band.
Wow, he really did it up.
Fit much more.
He really did it. And all this time, were you still teaching in Berkeley?
Ferguson Florissant, it was, they merged into Ferguson Florissant, yes.
Mhm. Did you take part, I know you said he was busy in high school, but did they do activities in Bridgeton? You know, I know my children went to the summer day camp program.
Yeah,
Did they do that?
They did that. They still love to go through the woods at Gentry Park. Remember that? And they took swimming lessons at the pool. And Jimmy was on the swim team a couple times.
The Bridgeton swim team,
yeah.
Mhm.
right?
Jeff worked as a lifeguard at Bridgeton a couple years.
So they were pretty involved in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're-
Jim did the lifeguarding, I think, 1 year.
Do either one of them
Yeah.
live in Bridgeton now?
Well, Jeff lives in that third house, 12715 Spanish Village Drive.
Is he single?
Yeah.
Jeff is still single, and Jim just bought a house, and I guess it's 63146. It's in St. Louis County. It's over there,
Craig and Olive.
Craig and Olive. So
I want to ask you something. You know, sometimes we talk to people. Sometimes we talk to people about Northwest Plaza, which is such a big thing for our area.
right.
And Northwest Plaza seems like it just has done a big circle as
Right.
far as built and, you know, just popular and a busy place, and now it's hardly anything. But another development in this area is Earth City. And I know when we moved into the subdivision in 1973, it was just all woods and swamp, and like you said, your boys like to go through the woods, and my son as well. What do you think when you heard they were going to develop Earth City?
Well, a lot of people in Bridgeton were not for it. But my dad, who had, they had 75 acres down at the end of the Earth City Expressway. And they actually, you know, sold their property to the development. I think it was Bianco Properties at the time. But my dad and his brothers had been through a number of floods. And so they knew exactly what they were up against as far as getting a big enough levee that would be able to hold that water back. And my dad, he always said, you know, he was for the development, mainly from the Earth City part of it, the north of Rock Road. He was for that just to get a levee in there to protect that land from the flood. And so as far as the others in between the Rock Road and 270, or Highway 70 rather, you know, he really didn't have, didn't express a whole lot of opinion. You know, it was development for the area, and so he was for that. But after he had, after they put the levees up on the north side, and they were able to sell their property over there, well then, you know, he done had his money out of it, I guess you'd say. And so it didn't, you know, it didn't really matter, just
But what did you think of it? Did you
Well,
think it was a good idea or a crazy idea? Or what did you think of them actually developing that area?
that whole area.
Yes.
I thought it was a good thing. I always thought Bridgeton should have been a part of it. I often thought that even though it's Earth City, it should be in Bridgeton. It should all be Bridgeton. But we had so many people that was fighting against it, and so now it's there and we don't have any benefit from it. And so whoever fought against it, well, you got your way, I guess. But
Why didn't they want it to be part of Bridgeton? Do you remember?
no, I don't really remember. And you know, I go to church with Al Stoll, and he was involved. He was the mayor of Bridgeton, and I just never did ask him, and I guess I should, about why, what was all the opposition to
Right,
Earth City?
yeah.
Because I mean, anytime you can get jobs near the city of Bridgeton and then don't have to run clear across town or somewhere else to get it, and have them right in your back door, that's the way to go.
And we even have the Rams training facility
Wouldn't have the
down
Rams
there.
training if it wouldn't be for that. So, and you're where you live, Judy, you can walk to the Rams
Oh, yeah.
thing, and
Oh, yes.
and that park, the Spanish Village Park. It's a lovely view up on top of that hill.
Yes.
You can look out and just see everything.
Yes, that's true.
So.
Well, we certainly have enjoyed talking to you, and I know you could tell us a lot more, but, you know, we are limited in space of 1 hour for our video tape. And it was really nice to hear what you remember about the area. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about Bridgeton? Since you are still Bridgeton residents, all three of you,
Right.
is there anything else you'd like to say about Bridgeton?
No, I can't think of anything. Anyway, I did talk to Al Stoll, one of the previous mayors, and all the tornadoes that come through, it just seems like there should be a limit as to how long we have to look at the damage before it gets fixed.
Right.
Because there's still a lot of, like over in Harmon Estates, there's houses that are still got tarps,
Yes.
and it don't think like anything happened. So,
Right, that's such a sad thing that happened to our area.
Okay, and we thank you very
That's
much.
it.